Hey everyone, Cleo here, and I'm here to reshoot my May wrap-up because I wasn't too happy with it. I filmed my May wrap-up like right after I filmed my June TBR, and I think all my energy went into the June TBR, so I'm going to reshoot my May wrap-up and give it the attention that it deserved. Now, in the month of May I participated in the Asian Readathon. I will relink the announcement video and things like this if you want more information about the Readathon and maybe want to participate next year. But so, the Asian Readathon, basically, my cat is choosing this time to eat. Yes, thank you. And the other cat is gonna join, so we're gonna have some background cat noises, I guess. So the Asian Readathon basically consists of 5 prompts. You can combine prompts if you want to, but the idea is that if you read multiple books for different prompts, for example, then each book is by a different Asian nationality. So either the characters from different Asian nationality or the author writing them is from a different nationality, in order to diversify in our reading of Asian literature. For me this definitely was interesting because I'm usually more drawn to like Chinese, Japanese culture. I also studied Chinese for a while, and so naturally I tend to go more towards the Chinese the Chinese culture and literature. I also very much am interested in Japanese culture due to having watched like all the Hayao Miyazaki movies and things like that, so I'm very much interested in these two cultures, and so more in like the Far Eastern. And it was very interesting to look at like the Middle East as well for this challenge then. So I'm going to start off with rounding off the books that I read for the Asian Readathon, and at the end there will be a couple of different books that I also read for other challenges. So first I want to discuss Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage by Haruki Murakami. This was for the challenge of reading a book which was originally written in a language not English. So this is originally written in Japanese and then translated into English. This, so far, is one of the most surprising books for me for this year, and that's not because I don't like Haruki Murakami or because it's my first Haruki Murakami, because it definitely isn't. I've read like, I don't know, 5 books by him or something like that before, and I really liked them. The reason why is just because I haven't heard too much about this one, you know. I haven't heard too many people discuss Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki, and it's not like mentioned as one of his great books or anything like that. So I was kind of expecting it to be more like mediocre or just not stand out, but for me it definitely was. So I absolutely enjoyed this book a lot. So Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki is about our main character Tsukuru Tazaki, and the first line of the book already gives you a good idea about the mood that he is in. So I absolutely adore the first line of this book. I think it's one of the strongest one I've read. So from July of his sophomore year in college until the following January, all Tsukuru Tazaki could think about was dying. So it immediately clears up that he has been in a very dark period of his life. And the reason why is because when he was in high school, he was part of a group of like 5 people who were all very close-knit together, they had a very close-knit bond. And all of these other people had colors in their last name, and that's why he got known as like the Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki. But this colorlessness really affects him. He really starts to see himself as being colorless, as being the one person in the group who like doesn't really contribute to anything special. You know, he sees all of his different friends being like, that one is the artistic one or the outspoken one. I'm just saying something, I don't remember exactly. And he considers himself to be like the less essential part of the group, you know, to be like the one who's just hanging around, floating around, like tagging along, and he considers himself to be the one that like could be let go the easiest. So it's very traumatic for him when that actually happens. So at some point after he's gone to university in Tokyo, he returns home only to discover that his friends no longer want to deal with him, they've cut him out. One of his friends is the one who the one friend who brings him the news. When he asks why, he says, "You should know why." And Tsukuru Tazaki, being so unsure about himself, doesn't really dig into the why of that. He doesn't ask for an explanation. He kind of, I guess, assumes that it's just because he's not essential to the group or anything like that. And so he just lets it be. He drifts up to Tokyo and doesn't try to reach out to his friends anymore, doesn't try to understand what happens. But so we are now, I don't know, 10 years in the future or something like that, and he's still struggling with his self-image due to this. And when he's like getting into the beginnings of a relationship with this girl called Sada, then he tells her this story, and she asks, well, she kind of pushes him to go back to his hometown and find out what happened. She says, you will never be able to continue on with your life if you don't figure out what happened there. So I absolutely adored this book. I think it's a very good book for people who at some point have felt like who've had issues with low self-esteem. I think you'll definitely recognize parts of it in yourself, parts of it in the character of Tsukuru Tazaki. I will link a review down below of a person who talks about that aspect of the book very strongly, in my opinion. But apart from that, I also just love the imagery that's being used. You know, Haruki Murakami, I feel like, has a very nice way of putting tone and atmosphere into his books. This is definitely one of his more accessible books because if you've read Murakami at some point, you know that there's always something like weird, beyond weird, happening in the book. This one's very low on it. The only like weird stuff happens in like dreams, and so you're not really sure like what the idea behind it is, or did this actually happen or not, which is very common in Murakami books. But this only happens once here, and it's not really coming back. So in other Murakami books it might actually be like at least hinted at that this happened for real. Here it's more or less assumed that it's not. You're more or less assuming that nothing actually happens. And so this is very much more on his contemporary side. So if you want like an in on Murakami, I think this one would definitely also do. I also like the imagery of like trains. He uses a lot of trains, and if you see like the actual cover underneath here has like metro lines and things like that. So our main character builds train stations, and it's been his passion all his years, railway stations. And so in this book at times also he goes to a railway station when he needs to reflect on things, and then he watches people going and coming, and that eases him, and that puts things in his perspective for him. Also the imagery of colors which is being used, so here you also see like the 4 colors of his friends, and then this is Tsukuru Tazaki himself, which also I feel the cover is very beautiful because it also shows like these 4 together and then like the 5th one kind of stepping aside. But yeah, I thought it was a beautiful novel. I also highly encourage you to listen to the song that is mentioned in this book. I think it's Le Mal du Pays, but I'm not entirely sure now anymore. But like the mood of that piece works very beautifully with the book. Like Murakami almost always uses some sort of music in his books. Usually it's jazz, in this case Le Mal du Pays, and I always find it interesting to listen to these songs either after I finish the book or while I'm still reading it. And so I couldn't recommend Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki more than I do, because to me at least this really struck a chord and I really found myself relating to it a lot. But so yeah, this is a 5-star read for me. I first debated giving it a 4.5 star because it just didn't overwhelm me, but that's also the beauty of it. I think it's very beautiful in its simplicity, in the way it stays small, you know. A lot of stories try to go big, and this is very much an opposite of that. It's a story that stays small, but it's so beautiful in its smallness. A lot of people have problems with the ending. I understand the problem that they have with the ending, but I also think it is perfect. I think we don't need to know what is happening at the end. I think it is perfect to leave it in the open because it shouldn't make a difference to the way Tsukuru Tazaki has evolved throughout the book. Then another book that I read for the Asian Readathon is In the Vanishers Palace by Aliette and Bodard. This is a very short book. I read it for the challenge of reading a book by either an intersectional author or with an intersectional character. This fits in many ways. So we have an author who's of mixed descent, and then we have a character who is Asian and who is gay. Now, In the Vanishers Palace basically is about, like, we have sort of like a broken world in which there are these beings called the Vanishers, so if you step outside of the town, for example, they could claim you or something like that. That's basically what I understood from it. And so our main character, she is living in a town in which your usefulness is basically which determines your place in the world. And if you at some point turn out to be of no use to the village anymore, then they might as well oust you. And so she's kind of on the brink of being ousted or not, but because she's the daughter of the healer, she is being trained to become a healer. That gives her some usefulness. It gives her potential usefulness. And so she's kind of balancing there with her place in this town. And then at some point, like, the daughter of like the chief of the town gets ill, and her mother has to heal her. But she has gone so far that her mother needs to call up the help of a dragon. And this dragon heals that person, but in exchange she will claim a life. And so she's actually going to claim the healer, but our main character interposes and offers herself instead. And so she travels to the Vanishers' palace, which is the place where the dragon resides. And so I'm not going to go into more of it because, like, yeah, it's very short, so if I go into too much then I'm basically giving everything away. I enjoyed it, however I also felt like it was too short, you know. As I said, I'm not entirely sure about the Vanishers and their role into this world, and that would have definitely been interesting to expand upon more. I mean, I feel like the world building was very much something you need to take for granted, something you need to kind of fill in for yourself, and that would have been nice to have that expanded upon more. But then again, I'm a sucker for world building, so maybe people who are more into the character development side of story will not care too much about world building not being elaborated that much. But so for me, this was the part that I felt like was lacking. I felt, yeah, I liked the characters to some extent. I liked relationship that develops and things like that, but it also stayed relatively bland to me. I ended up giving it 4 stars, I think, because I did enjoy it a lot. But I do think like it had so much more potential in there. The next book that I read for the Asian Readathon is the group read, which was I'm gonna say it wrong because I've said it wrong every single time, and that's 1,000 beginnings and endings is the correct way. I've always said 1,000 endings and beginnings. I don't know, I just think it sounds better apparently. So 1,000 Beginnings and Endings is a short story anthology. It has been edited by Ellen O, and it basically involves a mix of authors of Asian descent who take a story from their cultural heritage, from the culture that they originate from. And it can be like a myth, a legend, or like a holiday, something like that, something important to their cultural heritage. And they give a new spin to it, or they retell it. Sometimes they change genres altogether, things like that. I really enjoyed this. I really love mythology, so when I was a child I would read a lot, but of like the ancient Roman myths, the Latin myths, and I know a lot about those mythologies because those are the mythologies that were like kind of pushed at us from my cultural background. But I find it very sad that I don't know anything about like Asian mythology at all. And so it was very interesting to have at least a slice of that in this anthology. It's also very interesting to see what some people do with it. You know, you have some very more like standard retellings that basically just tell the story anew, just like in a fresher way, a way that suits better to modern audiences. But then you also have people who really take a certain part of a culture, like for example a holiday, and insert it into a totally new story, or who take a certain myth and put a whole new spin on it, making it almost like a sci-fi or something like that. So I really enjoyed it. As with all anthologies, of course, there are certain stories I like more than I like others. So there are certain stories that, for example, I totally enjoyed, and then there are stories that just didn't do it for me. But on the whole, I felt like the majority of them, like almost all of them, I at least enjoyed. And so I ended up giving this anthology a 4-star rating. It was also very nice for me to read this because I read it on the commute to work, so I could read like a short story before I got there and a short story before I got back home. So it was a very nice way to kind of like frame my work day, if you want to put it like that. Then the final book, now I just think for a second if that is the final book, but yeah, there were 5 challenges and I only completed 4. So the final book that I read for the Asian Readathon is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. So I read this basically as the most general challenge of all, to read a book by an Asian author, and we were encouraged to read books by different nationalities. So 1,000 Beginnings and Endings has multiple nationalities. Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki is Japanese, In the Vanishers Palace is Vietnamese, and then this is Afghanistan, which to a lot of people is not Asian, but is definitely, it is included. The Middle East is also part of Asia, and so I really wanted to definitely get something from the Middle East in there, and I've been putting off Khaled Hosseini, you know, in a manner of speaking, for a very long time. You know, The Kite Runner and 1,000 Splendid Suns have both been huge successes, at least here in Belgium. But when around the time that everybody was reading this, like everybody was reading it, and so I felt like I was late to the party, and so I didn't want to read it at that time. And so now I'm finally getting around to it, and it's definitely worth all of the praise. I don't own The Kite Runner, so I chose 1,000 Splendid Suns for the moment. I also have another book by him, but this felt more like to be focusing on the female experience, which I found to be very, which I was very much interested in, and it was, I think, a very good choice for me. And so in 1,000 Splendid Suns we follow 2 protagonists, mainly one at the beginning, and then we are later on introduced to the second one. The first one is Miriam. She is the bastard daughter of like a movie theater owner, and then her mother, who is like, she's not his official wife, so in that sense she is also like ousted from society. And at first she always feels like her mother is the hard one, you know, the hard one of her parents, the ones who's constantly trying to show her the reality of things, while her father kind of wants to show her the possibilities. And you definitely get the sense that in the beginning she's feeling like her mother is like the bad guy who's constantly putting her down, and her father is lifting her up. But as early on she is hugely disappointed by her father, and we kind of get to see that the reality of her mother and of how her mother was dealing with her is probably the one that was most suited to her situation. But so due to circumstances, she is married off to a man who's like, I don't know how much older, 30 years. So she's married off to a guy who's 30 years older than her, and at first it seems like their relationship is actually quite okay, but then the disappointment over not being able to have children starts to ruin their relationship, and starts to really put a contrast to, you know, the roles of power in their relationship. Due to circumstances later on, we're also having a second person join the household. Her name is Laila, and she comes from a very much more like modern family relationship. So her mother and father were very much more like equals, and like the role of her mother as a female was way more empowered than she sees the role of Miriam in this new household that she's entering into. While these females first start off having like a bad relationship together, as like feeling like the one is interposing on the other's territory, in the end they realize that they are stronger together, and they form an incredible sisterly bond. Now the biggest, like, you know, what I enjoyed most about this book is that it really pushes you through a lot of Afghan history, and it shows you the evolution of the female role in the history. So there are times in which females are very much being empowered by the regime that is in power at that time, and then there are times in which that power is completely taken away. So I thought it was very interesting also to see in the to have this in the backdrop, and then to have it steer certain plot developments in the book. I thought it was wonderful. It made me cry at times. It was definitely heartbreaking a lot of the time. So definitely encourage you to read this one, and I will definitely be picking up more Khaled Hosseini in the future. So these are the 4 books that I read for the Asian Readathon. There was also a 5th challenge, which was to read a graphic novel or a comic book or anything like that by an Asian author, or illustrated by an Asian author. I didn't get around to it this time because yeah, I had a book coming over from the previous month, for example, that I knew I wasn't going to be able to fit in otherwise. But so there are 2 more books that I read this month. The first one I'll go over very lightly. I've also already forgotten its title again, and this is a romance novel. I think it's Someone to Watch Over Me. Yes, Someone to Watch Over Me by Kleypas. So yeah, once in a while I slip down the slippery slope of the romance novel. I enjoy them, but I just always forget what they're about, so I feel like they're not really having an impact on my reading life, and so like it's just there for like relaxation, entertainment in that sense, but I'd rather read something that has more of an impact on me. So I'm not dissing on the genre, it's just that for me I feel like it doesn't have a lasting impression. So Someone to Watch Over Me by Kleypas. I read 2 romance novels consecutively, so I have to remember which one this is. So we are following a Bow Street runner who one night gets called out because there's a woman who has been found in the Thames, so in the sea, in the river that runs through London, and he immediately recognizes her as a woman who's like notorious. She's like a highly sought out courtesan, and she once spurned him, and so he kind of decides to take his revenge and to pretend like they were lovers. It was enjoyable, I liked it, but yeah, that's basically all I can remember of the story. I mean, I know the twist to it, but that's about it. But if you want a romance novel to kind of completely wind down, or for example if you're in a reading slump, Someone to Watch Over Me might get you out of it. And then the final book that I read this month, which is actually the second book I read this month, is a book that I started in April, and that is Washington Black by Edugyan. So in Washington Black we are following our main character, Washington Black, who is a slave on a plantation in, I think it's Barbados, but I'm not entirely sure now. Yes, in Barbados, and he kind of gets noticed by the brother of the plantation owner, and he kind of recruits him to be like his aide in his scientific experiments. So he's kind of like making a sort of like what seems to be like a hot air balloon or something like that. He's trying to make that work, and he needs somebody of like the specific weight and size to kind of help him on his expedition with this hot air balloon. And so he kind of wants Washington Black to help him with him. This is the very start of the book. Due to some circumstances, they have to run away from the plantation, and so this is basically his story of life after slavery. You know, he travels around the world. Really, he's like at some point he's in the Arctic. He goes to Morocco as well, Amsterdam, Canada, I think as well. So very different locales. He meets a girl he wants to fall in love with and all of these things. So he's basically, for a slave at the time, very much free, very much empowered as well. However, the story also still shows like still questions whether he is actually free or not. He still clings on to a relationship with a former master of his, and still considers that, you know, it's still highly hangs on to that. So also his wife is constantly annoyed at this person from his past and tries to make him see that this relationship is not a healthy one, that it was never a healthy one, that it was never a relationship of equals. And also, like, he is being empowered, as in he is making discoveries. He's very much intrigued by marine biology, and he's very much making a headway into like the way marine species are being conserved in zoos, for example. But it also shows like none of this is going to be attributed to him because of his origin. I think I liked what it was trying to do, but I still felt like it fell short for me a little bit. I liked the adventure side of it a lot. I just felt that it didn't push through its ideas strongly enough. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I liked it a lot, I still gave it 4-star read, but it's also like a book that will slip down into my memory and that will be forgettable in very short time, for me at least. So it was also shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, by the way, which is the reason why I'm picking it up. And in the month of June, in my wrap-up, I will have a little bit more of other Man Booker Prize shortlisted novels for 2018, because the long list is only coming out in July. But so yeah, these are the books that I read in May. So in total I read 5, and those 5 books were mostly also 4-star reads, 5-star reads. So I had a very good reading month in the month of May. I'm hoping to carry that on to June. At this point it's already like the 22nd of June, so I can say that I'm definitely not gonna read as much as I read last month, but so far I've also thoroughly enjoyed the books that I have been reading in this month. So yeah, catch you guys next time. I do not have a fixed like filming schedule or posting schedule. I film whenever, I post whenever, so hit that subscribe button and hit that bell notification if you want to be notified when I post something, and otherwise just let it be a surprise. See you guys!